Welcome. My name is Penny Rosema. You're listening to the Cookware Manufacturers Association podcast. In this episode, we have a guest, Michael Wolf. He is a publisher of The Spoon. If you're not familiar with it, you need to go out to thespoon.tech website. That's THESPOON.TECH. You're going to find a wealth of information there. The Spoon provides daily reporting and insight in the food tech revolution. They talk to innovators, disruptors, and creators, and they know what's going on in the cooking world in the kitchen. They also bring conversations to you in the forms of interviews, deep dive analysis, newsletters, and podcasts, which I highly recommend. They have a great podcast out there. But you can find all that information in those links by going to thespoon.tech. Now, Michael is also the founder of the famous Smart Kitchen Summit. Again, that information is on the website. We're going to learn more about that in our interview here. So watch for the show notes for all the specific links, but your major link to that website is thespoon.tech. So welcome, Michael. Welcome to our podcast.
Wow, what an introduction. That was so detailed and really very flattering. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here, Penny.
Well, it's all well-deserved. And I want to thank you. We talked here just before the call about putting a link on our website, cookware.org, that will link people to the summit, which is going to be virtual this fall. And there's some discount opportunities there. So thank you for that offer. And we'll talk more about that at the end and make sure people know about it. But since we're talking about the Smart Kitchen Summit, remind me and our listeners, when did it start and really what is it all about? I've just heard awesome things about it, but I've never attended.
Yeah, we started the Smart Kitchen Summit in 2015. I had been thinking for a while about the kitchen and how technology could change things. And so I was doing reports in 2013, 2014, writing about things like sous vide and other types of new ways to cook in the kitchen. And when I looked around, I didn't see any conferences or events that really explored this very deeply. There were smart home events. There were events that were looking, some events looking at food tech, not very many. But I just didn't see anyone really focused on this idea, like what happens in the kitchen as technology changes things and explores that very deeply. So I decided to start one. We started it very modestly. It was a one-day event in Seattle in basically an old cannery. And we just had a full day of conversation and it was really great. And I guess what I would say is most gratifying is, there's examples of how we've catalyzed innovation. I spent a lot of my career looking at markets like online video or things like that. And I just saw how slowly sometimes markets take to evolve, and it can be very frustrating. Venture capital spend tens of millions of dollars and lots of startups don't succeed. And I just felt like if we're going to, I felt very strongly that over time we would see a large scale reinvention of the way we cook. And I just felt like to catalyze that and move it forward more quickly, we should bring people together and talk about it. And so we've done that. We've seen partnerships spring out of this event. It's just been very gratifying to see how it's evolved.
It sounds fascinating. And like I said, I had board members talk to me and say, hey, this is a really great event. And we're disappointed that they couldn't see it face to face this year. But from what I've seen online, you've got some real great lineups on there. It's going to be a great event. So remind listeners, especially members, that there's a discounted link that you will be able to find on cookware.org. And you can always contact us if you don't find it easily. I'd like to talk a little bit more in depth about technology. So what, in your opinion, are the most interesting advances happening today in terms of technology in the kitchen?
Well, I mean, we've seen a lot of things like smart home and IoT technologies come into the kitchen over the past decade. We've certainly seen the fast rise of voice assistants and personal assistants, things like Alexa, and that technology be fused with the cooking experience. And that's been really interesting. I would say what we're seeing recently is an acceleration of and connection to the grocery shopping experience through digital platforms. And so we can take like a recipe or be using our refrigerator and what we're seeing is an acceleration of the connection to the shopping experience. And I think COVID has had a large part to do with that. And we're seeing fairly rapid consumer behavior change. Demographics like my parents who were in their 70s, who probably would have never grocery shopped online their whole lives and would have never done it in their lives, are doing it now because they're forced to do that. We're also seeing things like personalization technology. Cooking has largely been one size fits all. You get a recipe, you cook it, and everyone who's in the home eats the same thing. But we're seeing the ability to personalize things, and it's also around nutrition. So personalized nutrition profiles and personalized recipes, I think, is really interesting. DNA-driven diets, you can get a test of what your kind of microbiome makeup is, and get things like vitamins shipped to your home designed around that. And also, I think this has been an area that I've been really passionate about over the past half a decade, is like the reduction of food waste. And, in America especially, we waste a ton of food. The stats are well established. And there has been very little innovation around reducing food waste in our consumer kitchen. And I think we're finally starting to see that become an area of interest. I think large appliance makers are thinking about it. And there's lots of startups that are also thinking about it. There's a startup that I wrote about a week ago called Black Bear that is creating basically a smart storage center, like a next generation Tupperware device that will give you a warning when your food is starting to get old or maybe going to expire in a week. And it's sensing gas being emitted from the food, and because most food emits a certain type of gas when it starts to get old. So I think that's important. There's no reason why we should continue to use the same food storage devices that my parents used, and et cetera, down the road, when we could do it more intelligently and also just reduce less food, because we're going to have to feed 10 billion people. And we obviously have a problem with like lots of food going to waste. Why wouldn't we just use technology to waste less of it?
It's a standing joke for me, the things that die in the back drawer of the refrigerator there because you didn't pay attention to them. So what I heard you say was, the smart home, the rapid changes going into digital and people adapting to, ordering their foods or groceries, right? And then the personalization nutrition side, as well as focus on reduction on food waste. A lot of really hot and very interesting topics. I'm going to check out your blog on the one that you mentioned there. So people are listening here to the Cookware Manufacturers Association podcast. You can find more information about The Spoon and Michael Wolf and the Smart Kitchen Summit and all of that information. Be sure you check out our show notes. I have another question for you, Michael. Can technology actually hurt the cooking experience?
I think there are instances where people just apply too much technology for technology's sake, right? I mean, it's almost a cliche at this point. We don't apply technology for technology's sake. But I think there's very specific instances that I've seen in areas that we write about where, for example, someone will add an app to control, a coffee maker or to do something like with an oven, whereas before they may just press a button and do it very simply. So I think what you have to do is just look at what you're trying to help the consumer accomplish and not make it overly complicated, because ultimately what that does is creates frustration for the consumer, and it maybe adds time. And if it's something that, you're replacing a time-worn just user interface, like a dial that works really well, then I wouldn't necessarily do that unless you're adding and unlocking like really new capabilities that just adds a ton of new features and value for the consumer. So I think that's just one example of how I would think about that. Other good examples are just where technology can break down or just doesn't work well. So there's been some examples of like some connected appliances that just maybe aren't necessarily great and just add frustration for the consumer.
Yeah, so kind of that, don't invent it just because you can. Make sure
Right.
that there's a logical use for it, and then it really has a benefit. Other, like you said, maybe it's just as easy to push a button. Why would you complicate it more than needed?
Exactly.
Cool. And what do you think the primary focus for those who want to innovate around the cooking experience in the home? What should be their primary focus?
It's kind of a follow on to the last question, I think, because this idea of putting the user at the center of the design process is really important. And so when I innovate, when I think of some of the people who are doing the best innovations, they are making people's lives better and creating new cooking experiences. So like a good example, I think from the last 5 years is the air fryer, right? So most of us like the taste of fried food. Most of us who cook at home, many of us are very busy, especially if we're doing it in the middle of the week. We don't have a ton of time. And so I would never fry food. I would never keep like grease around and fry. Like that was just not a part of my lifestyle. But I can tell you, like, an air fryer has become a core cooking device in our household just because it makes food really taste really well, really good. It's quick. It's easy. Another example, obviously, is the new generation of pressure cookers, like the Instant Pot, that I think tens of millions of households have embraced now. So what these devices have done is, like, they're affordable. This isn't like a $500 or $1,000 appliance. They make food quickly and simply, and they make food that tastes good. And so they become core go-to appliances that are consumers want to use. So, I mean, you can go back in time and just look at cookware, like, non-stick cooking surfaces, etc., that just like are obvious things that really make a consumer's life better. And I think it's those types of those interfaces, material advancements like non-stick surfaces, that consumers just really find valuable. And so thinking about the ultimate consumer experience, how to make their lives easier, and using technology to do that really is breakthrough in that regard. So I think that's what I would say.
That's awesome. I love your perspective and your experience and all. I appreciate so much joining us for a call today. I want to just put one last plug in for the Cookware Manufacturers Association. If you aren't familiar with our website, we maintain and update the engineering standards for the production of cookware and bakeware. We also, to our members, provide a number of timely statistical reporting. I just finished the import-export report and the statistical sales report for Q2. Those are be coming out on our website later this week or early next week. And of course, we're a resource for retailers, including training guides, and you can't get any better networking than the Cookware Association. And in our discussions just before we got on this call, I think I've talked Michael into pulling a panel together, and he's going to be joining us as one of our speakers at our fall meeting in September. So
I can't
more
wait.
on that.
It'll be fun.
I'm excited about that, Michael. And again, thank you. Any other last words of advice or comments that you have, or even more specifically, if I'm first time going to your website, what would be the first click you would recommend it someone might click on?
If someone likes podcasts, I would definitely recommend listening to ours. We get the Spoon writers and editors together, and we talk about what are the most interesting stories of the week or the past couple of weeks. And it's always a lot of fun. But I would just, also just check out some of the top stories. And if you want to go deep dive and kind of understand some of the new technologies in kind of in a deeper sense, we have a membership service called Spoon Plus that you can use to get research and access to our virtual events. So you can check that out there as well.
Yeah, that's right. I remember seeing that, Spoon. So I can imagine some of our technical people might find that information very helpful. So yeah, we'll make sure we include that in the show notes as well. You gave us all those links. Hey, Michael, thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your afternoon. And that makes it a wrap for this episode. We thank everybody for listening.
Thanks, Penny.